The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the Victoria Zen Centre. If you enjoy it, please forget about making a donation. Instead, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it as much as you did. You may also consider purchasing the Living Zen podcast app, which is now available on the iTunes App Store. Thank you for listening. Case 13. Deshan carrying his bowls. Deshan one day descended to the dining hall, bowls in hand. Shui Feng asked him, "Where are you going with your bowls in your hand, old teacher? The bell has not rung, and the drum has not sounded." Deshan turned and went back to his room. Shui Feng brought up this matter with Yantu. Yantu said, "Deshan, great as he is, does not yet know the last word." Hearing about this, Deshan sent for Yantu and asked, "Don't you approve of this old monk?" Yantu whispered his meaning. Deshan said nothing further. The next day, when Deshan took the high seat before the assembly, his presentation was very different than usual. Yantu came to the front of the hall, rubbing his hands and laughing loudly, saying, "How delightful! Our old boss has got hold of the last word. From now on, no one under heaven can outdo him." Wu Men says, "As to the last word, neither Yantu nor Deshan has yet dreamed of it. When I examine the case closely, I find it just like puppet theater." Wu Men's verse says, "When you realize the first word, you understand the last. The first and the last, as to this, it is not one word." This case is one everybody has a copy of this case underneath your cushion, so you can pull it out if you want to follow along as I go. I think for many of us, for many people, for all humans, I think, this case bears a particular significance. And it's important for me in the very beginning to just say the case, to me, the entire case is held in the first sentence. The first, not sentence, but little paragraph. Deshan one day descended to the dining hall, bowls in hand. Shui Feng asked him, "Where are you going with your bowls in hand, old teacher? The bell has not rung and the drum has not sounded." Deshan turned and went back to his room. If we stop there, we have a very potent, very complete, very well-rounded demonstration of the teaching. But whenever I bring this case up with people, they look at me like I'm crazy. So I think it needs some bearing out. I've got to sort of chop it up a little bit. I'll try not to go too long because there are a lot of people here for me to see. So we'll try to sort of wrap up Deshan in a nutshell. So we have this case here, and to sort of clarify it in terms that we can wrap our heads around, Deshan is the abbot. He's the head of the monastery. And in this case, apparently, he's about 83 years old. He's a very old man. He died when he was 83, and he's about 81 here, so it's like he's getting to the end of his life. Shui Feng is approximately 41 years old, and he is the tenzo of the monastery. He's the head cook. So we have this situation where the abbot hobbling down to the dining hall shows up, and there's nobody there yet, and the cook is there sort of looking out at the abbot. Now, there's some texts that explain or claim that the meal is late today. So the abbot's actually showing up on time. And the tenzo says, if it were here at the Victoria Zen Centre, the tenzo would say, "Hey, abbot, what are you doing down here? I haven't sounded the gong, and the jikijitsu hasn't rung the bell yet." So and he adds in this old teacher. Now, old teacher in Chinese, Lao Chi, in Japanese it means it's Roshi, right? So it's one of my favorite terms because literally, often when you talk to Zen practitioners, particularly in the tradition that I was trained in, the way that it's translated is old man, the old man. So, where are you going with your bowls in your hand, old man? The bell has not rung and the drum has not sounded. So the abbot turns around and goes back to his room. So the abbot's cabin there, his little space. Why is that significant? I think we have to look at Deshan a little bit to understand what's going on here. And I think we have to, once again, be reminded that when we're looking at cases, it's very important that we break out of this two-dimensional and two-sided sort of perspective, that we break out of this viewpoint where we're looking at these old Chinese guys bopping around and interacting. We have to look at this in a much more three-dimensional and spherical way in which each of us plays each of the roles taken up. We have to bring ourselves into each role, each position as we go through this case. So we have a very old teacher. Deshan began his career not practicing Zen, but another tradition of Buddhism. And he was famous for being a commentator and having tremendous insight into the Diamond Sutra. And he was known for traveling around and giving these unbelievably lucid and just earth-shaking speeches on the Diamond Sutra. And he came out of northern China and into southern China intent on one thing, which was the destruction of the heretical Zen school. And he brought with him all of his many commentaries and his many dialogues on the Diamond Sutra, and he was going forth looking for Zen teachers to challenge and to bring down because of their heretical teaching that awakening was something that happened instantly and that you could, anybody could grasp this just in the moment if they were able to fully enter. This was just ridiculous. Until he met a teacher named Ryutan. And this interaction, this meeting, is actually case 28 in the Mumonkan. So you'll have to keep coming on Sundays if you want to hear more of what happened there. Nonetheless, what ended up happening, or the transformation that happened, is that Deshan turned from a person who talked a lot to a Zen teacher eventually that almost said nothing. He was famous for demonstrating physically without any kind of words, and he was famous also for his staff because he liked to hit people a lot too. Instead of explaining things to them, he'd set them up and then hit them. So, and I think one of his quotes is, if you say what it is, I'll hit you with my staff, and if you don't say what it is, I'll hit you with my staff. So we have this situation where Deshan, who's also, you've got to remember, he's old, but he's a pretty fierce customer. And he's the boss. He's the abbot of the Zen Centre. So he comes down the road, ready for lunch. And if we go with the few people who say that lunch is actually a little behind, he shows up at the dining hall, and there's nobody there. And the Tenzo comes out of the kitchen and says, "Where are you going, old man, with your bowls? Nobody's rung any bells." So, what would you do? If you're the boss, if you're the old abbot, What happens to your brain? What happens in your heart when you enter into this situation and you expect something and that's not there? Maybe you assumed that something had already taken place. The bell had already rung because it was such and such a time. So for me, when I think about it, there's a bunch of possible reactions that I think I would have or any of us would have. The first is to go, back up, buddy. I'm the abbot around here. Don't you know, who do you think you're talking to? You better get that food out here, ring that bell. Chop, chop, I'm hungry. Or the other thing is that we would go, oh shit, I'm supposed to be the abbot around here. And look at me, I'm not even aware of like what's happened. Oh, geez, I'm such a dummy. I hope no one saw this. I hope no one, hears about this because, it's kind of embarrassing. But Deshan doesn't do any of this. He doesn't do that. This simple line, Deshan turned and went back to his room, is as close as I can say to a Zen miracle. It's miraculous conduct. Simply being pointed at, simply being pointed to, simply being corrected, or what has happened being brought to his awareness, he turns and returns to his room. I don't know how many of us can do that. How many of us, when we are corrected, when the Ino or the Jikajitsu or the Shika or the Abbot or all the people that get to correct people around here, make a correction, how many of us are able to just pivot and go the other way? No, let's just screw you, or no, I'm no good at all, I'll never get this right, this is so difficult. How many? How many times in our life can we pivot? This is very sort of typical or within the style of Deshan. Without having to say a word, without having to make a big show of it, he demonstrates the way, crystal clear. And this is where the rest of the drama unfolds. Because Shui Feng, he's this 41-year-old Tenzo, so he's been training for a long time. He missed it. And so later on, he's hanging out with his friend, a fellow practitioner, another monk, Yantu, who is apparently 35, younger. However, the way that these two are described, Shui Feng is described as a monk of great effort. He tries hard. And Yantu is described as a monk of great talent. And it's said that Yantu was just, although he was younger, was much more clear. And so Shui Feng brings this up with Yantu. So how do we think he brought it up? Did he just mention it in passing? Well, I don't think so. I think Shui Feng is a little bit boastful with Yantu. He says, look, listen to this situation. Nobody saw it, right? So I got to tell somebody about this. The master came down. I hadn't even rung the bell yet. And when he arrived, I told him, what are you doing? The bell hasn't rung yet. And he just turned around and went back home. But Yantu doesn't straighten him out. He sees the mistake. He sees through Shui Feng to Deshan. He sees what Deshan was demonstrating, and he sees that Shui Feng has missed it. And so Yantu transforms. He becomes a fox, I think. He takes up this mantle. I had a very similar experience with a monk in my own training where he just turned and he says, oh yeah, that Deshan, great as he is, he does not yet know the last word. Yeah, he's a famous monk and all, but you're right, he's really not that great. Of course, maybe someone overheard this maybe a loyal student went off and told Deshan, oh, Yantu's bad-mouthing you with Shuifeng in the kitchen. Deshan says, oh, this is really sad and unexpected. Yantu is a really clear young monk. Maybe he's thinking, he sees the end of his life coming and he says, oh, this Yantu, I had a lot of hope for him. I better talk to him. So Yantu gets brought by Deshan's attendant, and he says, I hear you don't think much of me. So Yantu, kind of chuckling, says, oh, wait a minute. I got an idea. Come here. So he tells Deshan what he's planning or what he's trying to do. He's pointing out, or he's helping Deshan. He's saying, you laid a meal in front of Shuifeng. You laid the offering of the Dharma in front of Shuifeng, and he turned his nose up at it. He missed it. But I saw it, and I don't want this lesson to go to waste. So maybe we can, stretch this out a little bit. Maybe we can play with this a little bit, and Shuifeng will realize. Shuifeng will see what's been pointed to, what's been offered. And so Deshan says, okay, let's play this. So the next day, when Deshan took the high seat before the assembly, his presentation was very different than usual. So it doesn't go into any detail of how it was different. But I can only assume that perhaps his style being much more reserved and quiet, subtle, maybe he was a little more loud, maybe he kicked back to his youth when he had these nice hellfire and brimstone talks on the Diamond Sutra, and he just really gave it. And Yantu comes forward. So imagine this kind of younger monk coming up to the front of the hall after this really great, totally different talk and saying, there it is! He's got it now. Now nobody's going to be able to touch him. But we have a problem here, because in spite of all this drama, in spite of all this effort that's being made by this disciple and a teacher, in spite of how radiantly clear the point is made in the first place, the sad truth is of this case that Shuifeng still doesn't get it. His awakening story comes out a little bit later, after Deshan has died and when he's traveling with Yantu. But in this case, we have an example of a master and another student who is also a teacher in his own right, really trying to help a Dharma brother see the way. And we have a case that helps us to understand that this doesn't always work. Mumonkan says, as to the last word, neither Yantu nor Deshan has yet dreamed of it. When I examine the case closely, I find it just like puppet theater. We have this case where a great drama unfolds, where Shuifeng is presented with a clear and completely wordless teaching alone. He's completely alone with the teacher. The teacher has nothing else to do and completely lays it out as clearly as he can muster in the moment, and it's entirely missed. When Shuifeng brings it up with Yantu, it becomes clear. It becomes clear to Yantu that Shuifeng is looking for something. And by something, I mean a tangible object or thing or state or something that he can really lay his hands on and say, oh, that's it. That's the teaching. That's the Dharma. That's awakening. That's my true self, whatever. And Yantu presents it to him. He throws him the bait with this idea of the last word. What is this last word? The whole drama unfolds, and Deshan presents himself in a completely different way to just further set up Shui Feng. So Yantu says, oh, and now he's got it. But does this make what it is that he's pointing to any more clear? They're just pulling apart Shui Feng's idea, Shui Feng's desire, Shui Feng's target, his object of his practice. In some ways, it might be said it's a bit cruel that Yantu and Deshan are playing with Shui Feng, that they're baiting the hook with a food that they know he likes. And even though he seems to take it, they're unable to straighten it out at this point. Wuman says, it's easy, and I think the challenge of this case as well is that when we hear about this last word, we forget that we so strongly identify with Shui Feng. We so strongly, in the case of the master coming into the dining hall, can identify with getting one over on our elders. Silly old man. Now I'm the Tenzo. I have some control. And the abbot came in. I got one over on him. I think we also identify with Shui Feng in the pursuit of a thing. And for each of us, it's a different thing. It's a money or control or awakening, spiritual goodness, morality. There's all kinds of things that we can have as our last word that we chase after. Wuman says, as to the last word, neither Yantu nor Deshan has yet dreamed of it. Now, as is the case almost always with Wumen, compliments should be looked at with suspicion. Criticisms should be carefully examined. Because what we value or what we appreciate from the subjective self is often what we are asked to let go of in our practice. Yantu, Deshan, even Shakyamuni Buddha have never dreamed of this thing called the last word. Why? This is Wumen complimenting, and I don't think I'm going to explain that too much. When I examine this case closely, I find it just like puppet theater. Aitken Roshi has a translation of this where he says it's like, what are they called? Punch and Judy in a box. We've got these two. They're putting on a show for Shui Feng, hoping that he'll catch the point. We can get distracted with thinking that these Deshan and Yantu are involved in this really serious Dharma duel with one another, and there's all this secret information that's being passed between them. But when we stand back and look at what's going on, it's a show, it's a drama, it's a demonstration in the hopes that Shui Feng will see the way. Wumen's verse says, when you realize the first word, you understand the last. As I say over and over again as we go through these cases, it's very difficult for us. It's easy for us to hear it. It's easy for us to conceptually grasp the teachings of Zen. It's easy for us to listen to the teachings of the Buddha and all of these masters, things that say, already you are complete, already you are manifesting your true nature, already all things in this vast cosmos are already awake. It's easy for us to say, oh yes, just so, just so. But when we investigate how we manifest, how we relate to the world around us, how we understand our world, we find that it is not consistent with these teachings. It is not, we don't behave as if we have no fixed, permanent, lasting, separate self. We find that much of our behavior is based on preserving this thing that we think we have, shoring it up, affirming it, making it grow, expanding it. This verse is again pointing to mu, pointing to shunyata, pointing to emptiness, zero. That there isn't this place to go to. There isn't more to grasp. Immersing ourselves into the origin. This is a terribly corny way of saying it. Immersing ourselves in zero. There's nowhere else to go. The first and the last, as to this, it is not one word. Aitken Roshi, in his translation of this, even says of his translation, I'm not sure I got this last line right. It's difficult. As to this, the first and last, as to this, it is not one word. It is not a word. It is not. So this case offers us an awful lot to contemplate, to reflect on, to investigate, to melt into. Again, I just want to remind you that as we investigate these cases, as we go through them, the practice is one of melting ourselves down, dissolving ourselves into the content of this case. We must become shui feng. We must intimately manifest as shui feng. We must intimately manifest as Deshan. We must catch up both of them as Yantu. We have to grasp what is being pointed at. We have to experience it for ourselves. So what is this last word all about? What is this that Yantu baits his hook with? What is, who gets the last word in this case? This is what we must consider. I'm going to end here and just ask that as we go into interview, as I said before, there's a lot of people here for me to see. So please be considerate of everybody's time. So as we're doing interview here on a Sunday, the opportunity is to bring up a question, if you have a question or a concern about practice that is of concern. If things are going well, then I'll ask a few questions. How's this? How's that? And if everything is going well, just say so. And then we'll be finished and the next person can come down. If you want to speak to me for longer, I've opened the door and said, it's good to make the connection and have a training meeting. But as it is here, we only have until 12 o'clock. And I'd really like to have the opportunity to see everybody and see if there is something that I can help with. So please, as we go through interviews, be kind to one another and be kind to me. because if you go on, then it puts me in this difficult situation of having to say, that's enough. Goodbye. So thank you, and I look forward to meeting you in an interview. The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the Victoria Zen Centre. If you enjoy it, please forget about making a donation. Instead, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it as much as you did. You may also consider purchasing the Living Zen podcast app, which is now available on the iTunes App Store. Thank you for listening.